Hi folks, this is Tim, aka Turbo BB. Today I'll be covering in this video some O-ring maintenance and thread maintenance on the popular NITECORE TM11. Now this is version 1.12, which is the latest version for this model. And just quickly cover the differences that I had noticed while I temporarily had a version 1.11 is that I noticed the finish seems to be a little bit richer, darker, shinier too. I actually prefer the flat finish, and I don't necessarily know if this particular finish is better or not, but again, that's personal preferences. However, though, I do notice that the laser etching is much sharper on this model and brighter, whereas the other one was a little bit blotchy. All right, and also I noticed that one of the patent numbers were different actually. So now, to round out the differences, I also noticed that these cooling fins that run in line with the button actually seem to be a little thinner, perhaps to allow better heat dissipation between these channels here, but again, that's conjecture. I don't really know if that was the case or not, but however, just something I noted of difference. So with that said, one of the things I noticed was that the light came while it had grease on. The threads were a little bit gritty. So I actually used an alcohol pad and wiped away as much of it as I could, and I did notice that there was no grease in the channel for the O-ring. Now why that's important is that you would always want the O-ring to rotate as freely as possible. You would never ever want it to snag, because depending on the material and use, in particular for silicone or fluorosilicone O-rings, they have poor abrasion resistance. So as such, you actually want to make sure that there's as little resistance as possible for it while you're threading the light on to catch the O-ring on. So with that said, while I was cleaning, I did notice that I was actually removing some of the anodizing. So as you can see, there was actually already some that were missing, and then this huge gap right here that potentially came off as I was cleaning. I don't know for certain, but regardless though, that's just something to keep an eye on. It does jive with someone's comments on the forum that they felt that the anodizing on the T11 wasn't that great, but again, I haven't had a NITECORE product in quite a while, ever since the SR3, so I don't really know in particular if it's just my sample or in general, so just something to keep in mind. Now with that said, I'm going to go ahead and mount the O-ring. You want to just be able to stretch it just enough to get it on into the groove, and then I like to apply some grease around the edges. I had already applied on the underneath channel, so just a little dab. Now you've invested a chunk of money into this light, so it definitely behooves you to take good care of it, especially these threads, since they are so delicate and thin. And again, to apply on the O-ring. Now I'm probably applying a little bit more than necessary, which I'll clean off, but again, like I said, you do want to make sure that it is well greased. Okay, one final point I did want to make was that just simply snapping on the O-ring and then screwing back on the light is not a good idea, because this is a very delicate and thin O-ring, and typically it will not align properly, so that it will snag and create that little lump here, and it will catch the O-ring between the body. There are very fine tolerances there, so in that case you want to make sure, just use your fingernails, find the actually right here, this is a lump, and just gently press that in. Now obviously if you're an old hand at this, you probably don't need me, I'm preaching to the choir, but this video is really more targeted for those who may not be as familiar with the finer nuances of O-ring and thread maintenance. Okay. Let's do one last check. Looks like this is still sticking out a little bit, so I'm going to just push that in tightly. And again, being mindful that you don't want to remove too much grease, which is why I kind of erred on the side of overdoing it previously. Now here, this is interesting. As I'm pushing out, one part will pop out. So again, you want to try to balance that out as much as possible, and make sure that the O-ring is back in line as close to the body as possible before you thread it back on again. Okay, so that looks decently good. Going to go ahead and pop some batteries in here. because there is one actually final change that I did want to cover, which actually most folks know about already. Just back it out a few times to allow the grease to rub completely all over. Okay, it looks like there's still a slight bubble there, but that's something I'm going to have to work on. And again, this particular model, the O-ring is very thin and delicate and very sensitive, so I'm going to have to work on that one right there. But the final thing I did want to cover in terms of the changes was just cutting the light out. That's the voltage indicator kicking in here. Was that ring actually stays on now when the light is turned on. So okay. Now, another aspect of the light I did want to cover today was the tint. Now, some have mentioned that in particular they've noticed a pretty green tint on their models. I can confirm that on my sample it's the same as well. As you can see, that's pretty green, and some people may have actually mistaken this for a neutral color, because when you place it against a cool white light, it does kind of look like it's neutral. Right, so this is a cool white Xeno G10 on the right here, and this is a TM11 on the left here. Now, however though, in comparison to a true neutral white, now you should be able to see the difference much more distinctly. That the TM11 is indeed a little bit on the green side. And mind you, this is on the low level, which I think is a little bit more pronounced, whereas on the higher levels it's not as bad. So, but again, just wanted to highlight the differences there for you. Alright, so that wraps up this quick mini video. Thank you for watching and hope you enjoyed it.